On Thanksgiving, my own daughter looked me in the eyes and said the best gift would be for me to disappear. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I made one quiet decision that same night, took decisive action, and walked away without warning. What I left behind wasn't forgiveness or anger. It was something far more devastating, and what happened next changed everything. Before I tell you how that single sentence cost them everything they believed was theirs, take a second to support this story. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. The house was warm that night, too warm for late November. The fireplace in the living room crackled loudly, throwing orange light across the dining table where my family sat finishing their holiday meal. Outside the large front window, snow drifted down over quiet streets of Brookdale, covering the sidewalks in white. Inside, the chandelier glowed softly, making the room look like something out of a greeting card. Perfect, stage, and completely dishonest. My late wife's photograph rested on the mantel above the fireplace. She was smiling the way she always had, like she still believed family meant safety. I stood slowly from my chair, feeling every one of my 65 years settle into my knees and lower back. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and felt the edge of the envelope I had brought with me, still convinced, stupidly, that the night would end with gratitude. "I brought something for you," I said, my voice steady, hopeful in a way I didn't yet realize was embarrassing. "Happy holidays." I slid the envelope across the table toward my daughter. She didn't look up right away. Her phone was in her hand, screen glowing blue against her face. Her husband continued carving another slice of turkey without pause. My granddaughter pushed her food around her plate, eyes flicking between us, while my teenage grandson stared at his own screen, as if none of us existed. My daughter finally opened the envelope. The check inside was for $5,000. I had calculated it carefully. Enough to help with the credit card balance she cried about during a late-night call just weeks earlier. Enough to make breathing easier for them. Enough, I thought, to remind them I was still trying. She stared at the amount. Her expression didn't change. "This?" she said flatly, holding the check between two fingers like it was a receipt. "That's it." My chest tightened. "I thought it would help with the debt you mentioned. You said things were tight." She looked up at me then, and I saw something I didn't recognize. Not anger, not frustration. Something colder. "You know what would really help?" she said. "If you weren't around anymore." The room froze. The knife in her husband's hand stopped mid-cut. My granddaughter's fork hovered in the air. My grandson's thumbs paused over his screen, but he still didn't look up. Only my daughter remained perfectly calm, as if she had commented on the weather. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. She set the check down on the table, not into her purse, not folded away, just laid it there between the serving dishes like trash. "You're always here," she continued. "Always watching, always paying, always reminding us what you've done. We can't breathe with you around." I gripped the back of my chair to steady my shaking hands. 15 years of mortgage payments. 15 years of emergency calls. 15 years of fixing what broke when they couldn't. The numbers ran through my mind while my daughter explained why the world would be better without me in it. "I only wanted to help," I said quietly. She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You wanted us dependent. You wanted us trapped, so we'd always need you. Congratulations. It worked." Her husband kept his eyes on his plate. Silence was his favorite form of loyalty. My granddaughter's face crumpled, but she didn't speak. My grandson resumed scrolling, already checked out of the moment. I looked around the table and understood something devastatingly clear. They had all been thinking this for a long time. "I need some air," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. I turned away from the table and walked into the kitchen, each step heavier than the last. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. I braced my hands on the counter and stared at my reflection in the dark window. An old man with gray hair and eyes that suddenly felt very tired. Cold water splashed against my face. It didn't help much. The kitchen door swung open behind me. "Don't walk away from this," My daughter snapped, grabbing a sponge and attacking the dirty dishes with unnecessary force. Plates clattered loudly. Water splashed everywhere. What you said was cruel, I said. I needed a moment. Cruel? She laughed again. Try living under your shadow for 40 years. She accused me of control, of manipulation, of buying a house to keep them trapped, of paying bills so they'd always owe me. You made sure we could never leave, she said, because without us needing you, you'd be nothing. That was when it finally clicked. They didn't want freedom. They wanted ownership. They wanted the house. They wanted everything I had spent 15 years paying for, without me attached to it. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't offend myself. I walked past her, down the hallway, and into my bedroom. I closed the door gently and sat in the dark for a long time. That night, while the house slept, I opened the file folder I hadn't touched in years. I looked at the deed. I looked at the mortgage statements. I did the math carefully, and I realized something my daughter never expected. Everything she believed belonged to her was legally mine. That was the moment I stopped being a father who begged for respect and became a man who prepared consequences. And this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the old wooden chair by the bedroom window and watched snow fall over Brookdale, each flake settling quietly, like the house itself was trying to hide what had just happened inside it. My daughter's words replayed over and over in my head, not shouted, not emotional, delivered calmly, like a verdict already agreed upon long before the meal was served. If you weren't around anymore, at some point near dawn, I stood and crossed the room to the small bookshelf where I kept the things that still mattered. I pulled out the photo album, the one my wife had insisted on keeping updated every year. The leather cover creaked as I opened it, as if it remembered every time I had come here for comfort. There was my wife on our wedding day, smiling like she believed love was permanent. There was my daughter as a toddler, gripping my finger with both hands, trusting me completely. There were birthdays, school plays, scraped knees I'd kiss better, nights I stayed up worrying about how to give her more than I had growing up. I stopped on a photo of my wife holding our daughter in a yellow dress, both of them laughing at something off camera. I traced the edge of the picture slowly. When did I become disposable? I whispered to the empty room. I closed the album and set it aside. The past couldn't explain the present anymore. Only facts could. I pulled the folder from a nightstand and spread its contents across the bed. Deed, mortgage statements, bank records. Everything my daughter had called control was documented, signed, and very clear. The house on Linden Avenue was in my name. Always had been. I was listed as the sole owner. My daughter and her husband were occupants. Nothing more. 15 years earlier, when they had shown up at my door with a baby and a rejection letter from the bank, I hadn't thought twice. I'd driven them to the lender myself. When the officer explained that my credit would be required and the house would be placed under my name, I nodded without hesitation. Family took care of family. That was how I was raised. What I hadn't understood then was that generosity, when taken for granted long enough, transforms into entitlement. By morning, my decision wasn't emotional anymore. It was practical. I showered, dressed carefully, and left the house before anyone else woke. The air outside was sharp and clean, the kind that burns your lungs awake. I drove downtown to Crestline Legal, a small firm I had worked with decades earlier when I was still consulting in engineering. The attorney there had handled contracts for my company back when details actually mattered. When he saw me walk in, his smile faded into concern. "You don't look like you're here for casual advice," he said. "I'm not," I replied, sliding the folder across his desk. He read in silence for several minutes, flipping pages, typing something into his computer, adjusting his glasses. Finally, he leaned back. "You are the sole owner of the property," he said. "Legally, completely. Your daughter has no claim." "What about removing them?" I asked. He studied my face carefully. "That's not something people usually ask about their own children. They told me they'd be better off if I was gone." That ended the discussion. He explained the process calmly. Notice requirements, time frames, documentation. Nothing dramatic. Just law doing what it was designed to do. protect ownership, not feelings. Once you serve this, he said, tapping the draft notice, there's no undoing it. I understand. I took the envelope and left his office feeling lighter than I had in years. On the way home, I stopped at my bank. The mortgage balance was just over $40,000. After 15 years of payments, that was all that remained between me and full ownership. I want to pay it off, I told the teller. She smiled. That's a great milestone. She didn't know it was also a weapon. I authorized a transfer, watched the confirmation printout, and folded the paper neatly into the folder. The house was mine in every sense now, financially, legally, and soon, physically. When I returned home, the driveway was empty. A note on the counter said they'd taken the kids shopping. Perfect. I spent the afternoon packing quietly. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes, documents, the photo album. I booked a flight that evening. Somewhere warm, somewhere far, somewhere that reminded me I still had a life beyond being useful. That night, I sat at the dining table alone and wrote a letter, not angry, not emotional, clear. By the time they read it, I would already be gone. I placed the envelope beneath the crystal vase in the center of the table, the one my wife had loved most, heavy enough that it couldn't be ignored, symbolic enough that it would hurt. I went to bed early. For the first time since my wife died, I slept without waking. Before sunrise, I walked out of the house quietly, suitcase in hand. The porch light glowed behind me as I locked the door. I didn't look back twice. At the airport, my phone stayed silent until boarding began. Then it started vibrating nonstop. I didn't answer. 30 minutes later, the plane lifted off, carrying me somewhere my daughter never imagined I'd choose myself. And when the wheels left the ground, I felt something break free inside me that had been chained for far too long. The plane climbed through thick gray clouds, and with every 1,000 feet, the weight in my chest loosened. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been spent bracing myself, waiting for the next phone call, the next crisis, the next accusation disguised as need. Somewhere over the ocean, that tension finally began to fade. I landed in Kailana just before sunset. Warm air rushed into the cabin the moment the door opened, heavy with salt and flowers I couldn't name. The airport was small, relaxed, nothing like the rush chaos I had left behind. A woman placed a fresh layer around my neck and smiled like time didn't matter here. For the first time in years, it didn't. The hotel overlooked the water. From my balcony, the ocean stretched endlessly, waves rolling in with patient certainty. I stood there a long time without moving, listening. No traffic, no arguments, no guilt, just water meeting shore, again and again without apology. I turned my phone off completely. The next morning, I woke early out of habit, but instead of anxiety, I felt curiosity. I walked barefoot along the beach, letting the sand press between my toes. My body felt old but capable, sore in places I'd ignored for years, alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I tried surfing that afternoon and failed spectacularly. I swallowed salt water, bruised my pride, and laughed harder than I had in decades. The instructor clapped anyway and told me most people never even try. That night, sitting alone with a drink I didn't need to rush through, I thought about my daughter, not with anger, with clarity. She hadn't snapped overnight. The resentment had been building for years, fed by dependence and entitlement, until it rotted into something cruel. And I had helped create it by never drawing a line. 3 days in, I turned my phone back on. Voicemails flooded in. Missed calls stacked one after another. Text messages shifted from rage to panic to pleading. I didn't respond. On the 5th day, I listened to one voicemail. My daughter's voice sounded thin, desperate. She accused me of abandonment, of cruelty, of choosing money over family. She said the kids were confused, that her husband couldn't sleep, that they didn't know where to go. She never apologized. I deleted the message and turned the phone off again. Back home, the notice had been delivered. I knew because my attorney emailed confirmation. 14 days. No extensions. While my daughter scrambled, I hiked volcanic trails, watched sunsets bleed into the ocean, and relearned what silence felt like when it wasn't lonely. One afternoon, while sipping coffee in an open-air cafe, I realized something startling. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required engagement, and I had disengaged. A week later, my attorney called. "They've moved out," he said. "Left the property. No damage reported." I closed my eyes and let the ocean breeze move through me. When I returned home 2 weeks later, the house felt enormous and empty. Their furniture was gone. Their noise, their tension. My chair sat alone in the living room like it had been waiting. On the kitchen table was a note. "You won." It read, "Don't expect forgiveness." I tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. That night, I slept better than I had in years. And as I stood in the doorway of the quiet house, I finally understood something my daughter never would. Walking away wasn't punishment. It was survival. And the life I'd postponed for decades was finally mine to live. The silence of the house didn't feel empty the way it once had. It felt clean, like a room after smoke has finally cleared and you can breathe again without coughing. I walked slowly from one room to the next, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I wanted to understand what 15 years of sacrifice looked like when stripped of entitlement. The living room echoed when I crossed it. Their oversized couch was gone. The television they insisted they needed had disappeared with them. Only my old recliner remained, sitting alone in the center of the room like an island. I ran my hand along the armrest, remembering the arguments about why it should be replaced, why it looked old, why it didn't fit their style. Funny how it fit just fine now. I opened windows throughout the house, letting winter air rush in. It was sharp, biting, honest. The cold stung my face, but it felt deserved, like a reset. Dust stirred. Curtains shifted, and the house sighed around me, settling into a version of itself that belonged to me again. Upstairs, the rooms where my grandchildren had slept were stripped bare. No posters. No toys. Just faint rectangular shadows on the carpet where beds had rested for years. I stood in the doorway longer than I expected to, feeling a familiar ache rise in my chest. Loving them had never been a problem. Losing myself in the process had been. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt resolved. I spent the next week doing things I'd postponed for years. I met with a real estate agent, not because I was certain I wanted to sell, but because I wanted options. I had coffee with an old colleague who still consulted part-time and asked about project work. Not full-time, just enough to keep my mind sharp and my days intentional. Every conversation felt different now. I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. One afternoon, I pulled a folder from my desk and reviewed the financial summary I'd avoided looking at for too long. Mortgage paid. Debts cleared. Retirement intact. I had more freedom than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. I had built my entire identity around being needed. Without that role, who was I? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in small moments. In the grocery store, choosing food I actually liked instead of what was cheapest or easiest for everyone else. In the evenings, sitting in silence without checking my phone. In the mornings, waking without dread. The first letter arrived a month later. No return address. Just my daughter's handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The words inside were sharp and rehearsed. She accused me of destroying the family, of traumatizing the children, of humiliating her in front of friends. She wrote that I had always cared more about control than love, that this was just proof of who I truly was. There was still no apology. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not to reread, to remember. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. Shorter, angrier. This time, her husband wrote it. He demanded money, said they'd been forced into a smaller apartment, said the move had hurt his job prospects. He implied legal action, hinted at public embarrassment, accused me of ruining his life. I didn't respond. Silence was doing far more damage than any argument ever could. By the third month, the calls began. Different numbers. Voicemails left through acquaintances. Messages sent through relatives I barely spoke to anymore. Each carried the same theme. Can you just talk to her? Can you make this right? They didn't ask if I was okay. They asked if I'd bend. I declined politely, then stopped responding altogether. One evening, as I was organizing old paperwork, I came across my wife's handwriting again, notes tucked into folders, labels she'd written years earlier. She had always been the quiet strength in our family, the one who understood boundaries before I ever did. I sat with her photograph and spoke out loud for the first time since I returned. I finally listened. I said, I should have done it sooner. That night, I slept without interruption. Spring arrived slowly. Snow melted from the sidewalks. Buds appeared on the trees lining the street. The world moved forward whether I was ready or not, and for once, I didn't feel left behind. I started consulting 2 days a week. Not for the money, for the structure. For the satisfaction of solving problems that didn't involve guilt or obligation. I volunteered one afternoon a month with a housing repair program, fixing things for people who were grateful without expectation. The contrast was striking. They thanked me. They didn't demand more. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I ran into my daughter by accident. It happened at a bookstore downtown. I was browsing the history section when I felt someone stiffen beside me. I turned and saw her standing there, thinner, tired, holding a stack of books she probably couldn't afford. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she scoffed. You look well. I am, I replied. She glanced away, jaw tight. Must be nice. I waited. She clearly wanted a reaction, an argument, validation. None came. Finally, she spoke again. The kids ask about you. I nodded. I think about them often. Silence stretched between us. You could call, she said. You know that. So could you, I replied gently. She stared at me, searching for something, regret, maybe, weakness. She found neither. When she walked away, I felt sadness, but not loss. Loss implies something was stolen. This had been returned to me. That night, as I locked the door of my quiet house and turned off the lights, I understood the truth fully at last. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had stopped destroying myself. And the consequences were only just beginning to settle for those who mistook kindness for leverage. The first time my grandson's name appeared on my phone screen, my hand froze midair. It wasn't his number. He didn't have one yet. It was a shared device. His mother's old tablet, the one she'd once asked me to pay to repair because it was important for the kid's education. I let it ring, not out of cruelty, out of caution. I needed to know whether this was a bridge or a hook. The voicemail came seconds later. Grandpa, his voice said, unsure, like he wasn't certain I'd still answer. Mom says you don't want to talk to us anymore. I don't think that's true. I just wanted to hear you. I sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. That message hurt more than every accusation I'd received combined. Because children don't manipulate. They repeat what they're told. I didn't call back that night. I waited until morning, until emotions settled into clarity. Then I recorded a short reply, careful with every word. I love you. I always will. Some things between adults take time to fix. This isn't about you. It never was. I sent it, then powered the phone off. The next day, the messages started again, this time not angry, not demanding, but calculated. Apologies mixed with blame. Nostalgia paired with urgency. Promises that felt rehearsed. My daughter said she understood now, that she'd been under pressure, that stress had made her say things she didn't mean. She didn't mention Thanksgiving. She didn't mention wishing me gone. She mentioned money. They were struggling, she said. Rent was higher than expected. Moving costs had drained them. The kids needed stability. Just until we get back on our feet, she wrote. I stared at the screen and felt something settle inside me. Heavy, final, unmistakable. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry it had consequences. I typed, erased, typed again. Then I stopped. I didn't need to explain myself. I sent one sentence. I won't fund a life that wished me erased. Then I blocked the number. The guilt came later, creeping in during quiet evenings when the house echoed more than I wanted it to. When I cooked too much food out of habit. When I set the table for more than one. But guilt no longer ruled me. I let it exist without obeying it. Weeks passed. Summer arrived. I painted the back fence myself instead of hiring someone. My knees complained. My hands blistered. I smiled through it anyway. The work was honest. I sold the house at the end of August. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to close that chapter entirely. The buyer was a young couple, nervous and excited, holding hands like we once had. I left them the rocking chair on the porch. It felt right. I moved into a smaller place near the lake. 1 bedroom, big windows, quiet neighbors who nodded but didn't intrude. I furnished it simply. Only what I needed, nothing that whispered obligation. On my first night there, I slept with the windows open and listened to water instead of arguments. A month later, the legal letter arrived. My daughter had consulted a lawyer, claimed emotional distress, claimed promises made, claimed unfair treatment. I forwarded it to my attorney and went for a walk. 2 weeks later, the claim dissolved. There was nothing to contest. Truth is a stubborn thing. The final attempt came just before winter. A handwritten letter. Not angry, not pleading, tired. She wrote that she didn't recognize herself anymore. That things hadn't turned out the way she expected. That she missed how things used to be. She asked if we could start over. I read it twice. Then I sat at my desk and wrote back. I'm open to rebuilding something new, but I won't return to what broke me. I didn't offer money. I didn't offer housing. I offered presence with boundaries. Months passed before I heard anything again. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. A new number. I answered. "Dad," she said quietly. I closed my eyes. I'm listening. For the first time in years, she didn't speak over me. She didn't justify herself. She didn't ask for anything. She apologized. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. We spoke for 20 minutes. About the kids, about work, about nothing important. When the call ended, I felt drained but lighter. Healing, I realized, wasn't dramatic. It was slow, conditional, earned. That night, I stood by my window, watching the lake ripple under moonlight, and understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Love doesn't mean sacrifice without limit. It means choosing yourself without cruelty. And sometimes, the bravest thing a father can do is stop being a shield and become a boundary. Winter settled in quietly, like it had learned not to ask permission. The lake outside my window froze in thin sheets, cracking softly at night. I learned its sounds the way I once learned my grandchildren's breathing when they slept on the couch after long days. Life had slowed, but it hadn't stopped. And for the first time in years, that pace felt like peace instead of loneliness. My daughter didn't call again for several weeks after that first conversation. I didn't chase her silence. I had spent too many years filling every gap, smoothing every pause, fixing every discomfort. Now I let space do its work. Then one morning, a message arrived, not from her, but from her husband. Short, direct, uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. I failed as a provider and let resentment turn into entitlement. I'm not asking for help. I just wanted you to hear that. I read it 3 times. That message mattered more than he probably understood. Not because it erased the past, but because it named it. Accountability as weight. And for the first time, I felt it shift away from my shoulders. I replied with one sentence. Do better for your children. That was all. I spent the rest of winter focusing on myself in ways that once would have felt selfish. Physical therapy for my knees. Long walks. Cooking meals I actually enjoyed instead of meals designed to please everyone else. I joined a local workshop, helping younger contractors plan projects and budgets. They called me sir at first, then started calling me by my first name. They listened when I spoke. That surprised me more than it should have. In early spring, my daughter asked if she could visit. Alone. I didn't answer immediately. I imagined every version of that meeting. Anger, tears, manipulation, genuine remorse. I imagined myself shrinking again, giving ground I'd fought hard to reclaim. Then I imagined the man I was becoming. I said yes. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, standing awkwardly at my door, hands empty, shoulders tense. She looked older, not physically, something behind the eyes, a fatigue that comes from consequences, not age. The apartment felt smaller with her in it. We sat across from each other at the table. No coffee, no pleasantries. She spoke first. I didn't think you'd really leave, she said. There it was. Not an excuse. A confession. I thought you'd get angry. Or sad. Or dramatic. But I didn't think you'd choose yourself. I leaned back and studied her face. That's because I never had before. She nodded slowly. I was angry that you didn't need us anymore, she admitted. And then I realized you never needed us. You were just choosing us. That sentence hurt. Because it was true. She cried then, not loudly, not theatrically. Quiet tears that embarrassed her. I didn't rush to comfort her. I let her sit with it. I don't want things to go back, she said eventually. I just want something healthier. I considered that. We can try, I said. But there are rules now. She looked up. I won't fix your problems. I won't finance your choices. I won't stay silent when I'm disrespected. And I won't compete with your guilt. She nodded, again and again. I understand. We talked for hours. Carefully, honestly, sometimes painfully. When she left, nothing felt resolved, but something felt possible. That was enough. Weeks later, I met my grandchildren at a park near their new place. Neutral ground, open space, no walls full of memory. They ran to me like time hadn't passed at all. That nearly broke me. I played with them until my legs ached, bought ice cream, sat on a bench and watched them chase pigeons like it was the most important mission in the world. When it was time to leave, my grandson hugged me tighter than usual. You're not disappearing again, right? He asked. I knelt to his level. No, I said gently, but I won't always be nearby either. And that's okay. He frowned, processing. You'll still be my grandpa. Always. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, exhausted and full in a way that felt earned. Not drained. Not emptied. Earned. The phone rang once more before summer arrived. This time, it wasn't family. It was an old colleague. A project. Consulting. Short term. Good pay. Flexible hours. I accepted without hesitation. Life, it seemed, wasn't done offering me chapters. I stood by the window again, lake shimmering under sunset, and realized something quietly profound. I hadn't won. I hadn't punished anyone. I had simply stopped losing myself. And that changed everything. Summer arrived without ceremony, slipping into my life the way freedom had. Softly, without asking for permission. The lake thawed completely, sunlight stretching longer each evening, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. I let days unfold instead of managing them. The consulting work kept my mind sharp, but never exhausted me. 3 days a week, I advised younger firms that reminded me of myself decades ago, ambitious, overconfident, convinced that working harder could fix anything. I didn't correct them right away. Experience teaches better than lectures. Money flowed in steadily. Enough to be comfortable, not enough to become a burden again. I learned that wealth, like silence, can be protective when used intentionally. My daughter kept her distance at first. Occasional messages. Updates about the children. No requests. That mattered more than apologies. Restraint showed effort. Then something unexpected happened. Her husband lost his job. Not dramatically. No scandal. Just layoffs. A shrinking industry. A company trimming weight. I heard about a week later, not from them, but from my daughter's voice message. Carefully worded, nervous, controlled. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know, in case you hear it elsewhere. I sat with that message for a long time. This was the moment that would have broken the old version of me. I would have rushed in, paid bills, solved the problem, erased consequences before they could teach anything. Instead, I did nothing. 2 weeks passed. Then she called again. This time, her voice shook. We're struggling, she admitted. I'm picking up extra shifts. He's applying everywhere. We're managing, but it's hard. She waited. I didn't interrupt. I know I can't ask you to fix this, she continued. I just needed to say it out loud. I closed my eyes. That's the hardest part, I said calmly, saying it without expecting someone else to carry it. Silence stretched between us. Then she whispered, I finally understand what you carried all those years. That sentence landed heavy. I didn't offer money. I offered something else. I can watch the kids one evening a week, I said, so you can breathe. Nothing more. Nothing less. She agreed instantly. Boundaries held. The first night with my grandchildren, alone in my apartment, felt surreal. We built a blanket fort, burned pizza, laughed at nothing. When they fell asleep on the couch, tangled together, I sat nearby and watched them breathe, heart steady. I realized then that presence, not provision, was what they needed most. Weeks later, my daughter's husband asked to meet me. Just the two of us. We sat at a small cafe, neither of us touching our drinks at first. I was angry at you, he said, because you made it look easy. Providing. Showing up. I felt small next to that. I listened. I turned that feeling into resentment, he continued. And instead of fixing myself, I blamed you. He met my eyes. I'm trying to change. I nodded once. Good, I said, because no one else can do that work for you. He swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. You don't need it, I replied. You need consistency. That ended the conversation. Summer deepened. The children grew tanned and loud. My apartment filled with life once a week and silence the rest of the time. Both felt right. Then came the letter. Not from family. From a bank. An investment I had nearly forgotten matured unexpectedly. Decades-old paperwork tied to a project I'd helped design early in my career. The return was substantial. Enough to change everything. Again, I laughed when I read it. Once, this kind of money would have terrified me. I would have hidden it, distributed it, diluted it until it stopped being dangerous. Now I felt calm. I hired a financial advisor, updated my estate documents, created trusts for my grandchildren with conditions, education, health, no direct access, no entitlement. I told no one. Power is quiet when it's real. Late one evening, my daughter asked why I seemed so settled. You're different, she said. Not distant. Just solid. I considered that. I stopped confusing love with sacrifice. I answered. She nodded slowly. I'm trying to learn that too. Autumn approached again. 1 year since that night at the table. 1 year since I disappeared. I stood by the lake at sunset, watching leaves turn gold and red, realizing something final. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need vindication. I had reclaimed myself. And that was something no one could ever take again. A few weeks later, my daughter called late one evening. Her voice sounded tired in a way I recognized deeply. He's still unemployed, she said. Interviews keep falling through. I'm sorry, I replied and meant it. We're managing, she added quickly. Some days it feels endless. I listened. That was my role now. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. I used to think you enjoyed being needed. I stopped walking. The lake rippled softly beside me. I thought needing you meant you had power over us, she continued. Now I realize you were exhausted. And I never asked how it felt. That acknowledgement mattered. More than money ever could. I'd enjoy it, I said gently. But I didn't know how to stop. Silence stretched between us, heavy but honest. I don't want to repeat that, she said. With my kids. Or with you. That's how cycles break. I answered. The first snow came early that year. Light at first, then thick, covering the city overnight. The world went quiet in that way only winter can create. My apartment glowed warm against the cold, and one evening, I found myself sorting through old boxes I'd ignored for years. Photos, blueprints, letters. I found a notebook from my early 40s. Plans, goals, things I wanted to do someday. Most have been crossed out, postponed indefinitely. One line stopped me. Travel alone. Learn who I am without responsibility. I laughed softly. It had taken me 25 years. Better late than never. I'd booked another trip, not to escape this time, but to explore. Shorter, intentional. Somewhere I'd never been, just because I could. When I told my daughter I'd be gone for 2 weeks, she hesitated. "You don't need permission," she said quickly. I'll miss you." That was new, and it mattered. While I was away, something shifted back home. I didn't know it immediately. The call came on a rainy afternoon, halfway through my trip. Her voice was sharp with panic. "We got a notice," she said. "Our landlord is selling. We have 60 days. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. "That's difficult," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "I'm not asking." "I know you're not." She exhaled shakily. "We're looking at options," she continued. "Smaller place, different area. It'll be tight. You'll figure out," I said calmly. She hesitated again. "Part of me hoped you'd offer," she admitted quietly. "And part of me is relieved you didn't." I smiled. That was growth. When I returned home, winter had tightened its grip. The city moved slower. So did I. I cooked meals that lasted days. Read books without rushing. Let evenings stretch long and quiet. Then came the confrontation I hadn't planned, but knew would come eventually. My daughter showed up unannounced one afternoon, eyes red, jaw set. "I need to ask you something," she said. I gestured her inside. She didn't sit. "Did you come into money?" she asked bluntly. The question hung between us. I studied her face carefully, not accusatory, not greedy, anxious, afraid of repeating old patterns. "Yes," I said evenly. Her shoulders tensed. "And you didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" I chose my words carefully. "Because last time I had resources, it changed how everyone behaved, including me." She swallowed. "Are we cut off?" she asked. The phrasing hurt more than she realized. "You were never on," I replied. "That's the difference." Her eyes filled. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I just needed to know where we stand." I stepped closer. "We stand where we should have all along," I said. "As adults, with love, without dependency." She nodded slowly. "I think I'm finally ready for that," she whispered. That night, after she left, I sat alone and realized something important. This wasn't punishment. This was alignment. Weeks later, her husband found work again. Not glamorous. Stable. Honest. He called to tell me himself. "I didn't want you to hear it secondhand," he said. "Congratulations," I replied. He hesitated. "Thank you for not saving us." I closed my eyes. "You save yourselves," I answered. The holidays approached again. 1 year since everything broke. This time, I was invited, not expected. I accepted. Dinner was quieter, simpler. No grand gestures. No entitlement. Just food, conversation, children laughing. At one point, my daughter looked at me across the table. "I'm glad you didn't disappear forever," she said. "So am I," I replied. Outside, snow fell softly. Inside, something finally felt whole, not because the past was fixed, but because it no longer controlled us. And I understood then that the strongest move I ever made wasn't leaving. It was coming back on my own terms. The second winter, after everything broke, felt different from the first. The cold was sharper, the nights longer, but there was no fear hiding beneath it. I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. I had learned how to stand still without flinching. Snow covered the lake again, sealing it into a mirror of pale gray. I walked the same path most mornings, coat zipped high, breath visible, steps slow and steady. People waved now. Some stopped to talk. I had become part of the rhythm instead of orbiting around other people's needs. My daughter and her family settled into a smaller place across town. It wasn't perfect. The kids shared a room. Money was tight. But something fundamental had changed. They owned their choices now. I could hear it in her voice when she spoke. Less sharpness. Less defensiveness. More responsibility. One evening, she invited me over for dinner. Not a holiday. Not a crisis. Just dinner. I arrived early as usual. Old habits die hard. The apartment smelled like soup and bread. Simple food. Real effort. The kids greeted me like it was the best part of their week. I hugged them longer than necessary and let myself enjoy it. Her husband met my eyes and nodded. No tension, no guilt, just respect. We sat at a small table that wobbled slightly. He fixed it with a folded napkin, without comment. We laughed. That alone told me how far we'd come. Halfway through the meal, my daughter cleared her throat. "I want to say something," she said. The room went quiet. "I used to think you leaving was abandonment," she continued, hands tight around her mug. "Now I understand it was the first honest thing you ever did for yourself." I didn't interrupt. "I needed to struggle," she said. "We both did, and it terrified me, but it also forced us to grow." She looked at me directly. "I'm sorry it took me wishing you gone to finally see you as a person." That apology didn't erase the past, but it closed a wound. "I forgive you," I said quietly. Not because it was easy, but because holding on would only poison what we rebuilt. Her shoulders relaxed, as if she'd been carrying that moment for a long time. The kids returned to their soup. Life continued. That night, walking home under streetlights reflected in snow, I felt something settle fully into place. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. Spring came slowly. I sold the old house. Not in haste. Not out of spite. I waited until it felt like the right time. A young family bought it, nervous, hopeful, full of plans. I wished them well and meant it. I moved into a smaller place closer to the lake. Fewer rooms, less echo, more light. With the proceeds, I funded the trust properly, consulted professionals, and locked everything down. No one could touch it without purpose. Education, health, time. I didn't tell my daughter the details. Some things don't need to be shared to be loving. One afternoon, my grandson asked me why I smile more now. I thought about that. Because I stopped being afraid of disappointing people. I told him. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. At 66, I took my first art class. Badly. Charcoal smudges everywhere. My drawings looked like confused shadows. I laughed more than anyone else in the room. I traveled again, alone, then with friends, once even with my daughter and the kids. Different trips, different rules. When problems arose, I listened. I didn't solve. And slowly, they stopped expecting me to. That was the real victory. On the anniversary of the night, everything shattered. I sat by the lake at sunset. The water reflected fire and gold. I thought about the man I'd been, the man who believed love meant endurance, silence, sacrifice without limit. That man had loved deeply, but he hadn't lived. I stood up slowly, joints protesting, heart steady, and whispered a quiet promise to myself. Never again would I disappear to make someone else comfortable. Never again would I confuse obligation with love. And never again would I teach the people I care about that they could erase me and still keep my support. I went home, brewed coffee, and watched the city lights come on one by one. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. "Thank you for staying." I replied with the truth. "Thank you for letting me be myself." The house was quiet. My life was full. And for the first time in decades, nothing else needed fixing. If my story made you pause, reflect, or see family differently, support the channel by subscribing and sharing where you're watching from. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who need them most.